the Lambertville firemen were treated to dinner at what's now Finbar. So, okay, next picture. What? There you go. This is a rare photo of the aftermath of the big fire. This is Rock Art Revival right here. And that's, it's just a ghost. It's the Methodist Church steeple. That's what it looked like in those days. So, and this was taken from Bridge Street. So this is where Levi Abel's building was. And so.
Did someone come from the photography studio?
Yep, that.
To do that?
Okay, right after the morning after the fire, things were still smoking, and the town was swarming with sightseers, people selling safes, fire insurance, and other things which I can't remember. and Milford photographer George Freeling came down from Milford, and he took this picture and other pictures. So that's what was another picture, please. Whoops, we missed one. Oh, that was the one with the question mark. Okay, that was lost to us. Okay, so a few things that this is kind of the epilogue of the. Charles was okay. Charles, when the sun came up, they found Charles sleeping in a ditch a few blocks away. Totally fine. Okay. So, and he grew up to take over the furniture store, and he wanted nothing to do with the funeral end of it. Okay. So, what started the fire? Now, a correspondent for the Republican wrote that the fire occurred from natural causes is the most sensible conclusion to those who know the ways and carelessness of many of our citizens. Okay, but most of the newspapers said it was incendiaries. It was a firebug, an arsonist. But the Hunterdon Independent really just they wrote, we hate to think that someone did this on purpose. Now so they presented theories, one of which was kind of a variation on Mrs. O'Leary's cow, starting the Chicago fire, which was earlier in that decade. He said, what if Dr. Deemy's horse stepped on a match? Okay. Another one was, what if Dr. Deemy's horse stepped on a cap, like the boys using cap pistols? Which surprised me, because I thought cap pistols were kind of a 1950s thing, which I enjoyed. But I found out, in fact, I found it out sitting right over there at your taxpayer expense, Googling to find out when were cap pistols invented. And I found out that after the Civil War, gun makers needed something to sell, because everybody had a gun. So they invented cap pistols. So maybe it was a cap pistol the horse stepped on. Or now the restrooms, the outdoor toilets for the spoke factory, they were not secured at night, and the neighbors would use them. So maybe somebody went to the privy late at night, flicked the cigar butt into some dry manure or sawdust, and that could have happened. My own personal theory is I think we should take another look at the boys, the sons of Dr. Deemy. There was a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old. And back before there were video games, the boys liked to play with fire. And so maybe they started something earlier in the day that came to fruition later that night. I don't know. Now, the younger Deemy, the 12-year-old, his name was John. He became a doctor like his father, practiced medicine, dedicated his life to easing the suffering of humankind. So either he was a good boy and would never play with matches, or maybe he was trying to make up for the sins of his childhood. I don't know. But, so anyway, those are the theories. Probably was arson. never know. So right after that, Guy, do we have time for me to give a kind of an epilogue here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, right after the fire in July, the borough was very intent on getting a steam pumper. Okay. And there were meetings and committees to see, what they cost and how they would pay for it and all that. And they found out it would cost quite a bit. And they found that people didn't really want to pay for it. And by August, the Hunterdon Independent reported, quote, "As the smoke of the late fire gradually vanished, the enthusiasm for getting good fire engines seemed to go with it, and we scarcely ever hear the subject mentioned anymore." They repaired the old Vigilant pumper, but Frenchtown would not acquire a steam-powered pumper until 10 years after the big fire. So, they spent $8 and got an engraved brass speaking trumpet to send as sort of a trophy and a token of thank you to the Lambertville firefighters. Harness maker McIntyre thought he might set up shop in Irwina. Mr. Schofield, the photographer, went back to Connecticut where he came from. The Hahn and Williams Spoke Factory never came back. But the bounciest bounce back of all was the bank. Okay, as soon as their safe cooled off, they moved the bank into a house on the northeast corner of 2nd and Harrison. It was a house that happened to be vacant at the time. So the fire was pretty much under control by 4. By 9 a.m., that bank was open for business in that house.
Wow.
So that was impressive. And then the fire was the end of June. In December, they dedicated the bank building that we currently have in use, the brick building on Bridge Street. So that also was pretty fast moving. Now, Levi Abel became the proprietor of the Little York Hotel. He had lost pretty badly. He lost, his house and business, and also the rental house. Okay. Now, in the presses, and that was the end of the Frenchtown Press. They put out one more edition. It was printed in Trenton, and where Charles Joyner was entitled to a very bitter "I told you so," and he just complained about how you'd expect. I warned you. Now, one of the first buildings to be rebuilt was the one that's there now on the corner. This one. Okay? Now, it was built in halves. The first half was built right after the fire. That's this half. This half came along years later, not many years. And it wasn't until 2009 the building was owned by one person. It was always half and half, like row houses. Okay? So they built, the druggist, Albert Williams, rebuilt this building right on the site of his other one. And he put a time capsule in the wall. Okay, on September 27th, 1878. Okay, here's what the box. The time capsule was a tin box put together by Morris Maxwell, who was a tinsmith, who had incidentally served as a sailor aboard the USS Constitution. Irrelevant. But sometimes the burden of all these facts just kind of cause me to say things that are not to the point. Anyway, in the box were a Bible, copies of the Frenchtown Press, the Hunterdon Independent, reporting on the Great Fire, bank books and checks from our bank, a number of business envelopes, circulars, cards, etc. of the Independent and some local businessmen, and several histories of the local lodges, of a Bridge Street store called The Regulator, and history of the post office, and then something called Decades of Frenchtown by Willie Williams, and histories of Frenchtown by 5 men, including Bert Williams. And the thing I would like to have my hands on are melted coins, melted in the big fire. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Now, the thing is, as far as I know, the box was installed in the wall as the place was being built in the southeast corner. So that would be right here. So it's very possible that this time capsule is inches away from people where the early birders are guzzling their fancy coffee drinks. Inches away is this mysterious, well, it's not mysterious, I told you what's in it, but it's probably still there. And maybe someday we can get a metal detector and see it's still there. And maybe, well, I imagine that it might be a hard sell to ask the owner of the building, gee, can we tear apart your wall? And you think there's a bunch of old newspaper clippings in the wall. so that's sort of a dream, but we're going to make an effort and see if anything will come of that. So anyway, that's what I got. Yeah, question.
So how did they fill the vigilant pumper? From the creek or from the river?
Probably not the river, because the thing was very heavy. By the time they got it down the river, I think a big source of water at the time was the mill race. You know, we have Race Street, and that because it's parallel the mill race, and parts of it were open to the air. So I think that was probably the handiest way to do it. Much handier than the creek.
And one interesting fact, if you're interested in that mill race, across the suspension bridge, that's it's in the park, and you walk up along the creek, you can follow the mill race and see where it started, when the water came down along the creek under the what's the gas station now, right? And under the buildings that Dorsey Redding fixed up, where the pharmacy is.
Yep. So that was a good water source for firefighters.
So they would have had to keep that filled, right? Because they had to go to the creek.
It had water right up into the, I think, in the 1940s.
Rick, do you know, I often wonder whether that wheel that is in the sidewalk is the actual wheel that was used in the mill race, and the mill.
Short answer, I don't know. Long answer, I don't think so. So,
So no human casualties, 2 horses.
2 horses and a guy named Josiah Butler was paid $1 each to bury them. I do know that.
Can you provide some insight as to how you come up with all this information other than making the stories up?
I never make anything up. Sometimes I guess wrong, but I try to be as factual as I can. Although in my tours I invent dialogue. I do that, but I warn people about that. Most of what I got is from reading the old newspapers, and they have a good collection at the Hunterdon County Historical Society. And during the summer of COVID, they closed their library, their research library, so people wouldn't meet in there and spread disease. But I was the administrator there was a reporter of mine back in Somerville, and I said, it's a shame that it's closed. What if there was one person in there? He couldn't infect anybody. So I spent COVID summer in the library reading microfilm, learning everything I could. So.
Was there a sheriff in town?
Not a sheriff, but there was a town marshal and there was a constable who was elected.
I would think they would have done a tremendous amount of interrogation of people talk and, wonder if it's like transcripts or something.
There might be. Not that I know of.
The 2 fires so close in time.
They didn't have sophisticated equipment to figure out things, and they didn't have a lot of staffing. The constable and the marshal, they were like very part-time jobs. So. In fact, in 1920s, but they had so little police help that they appointed like 9 downtown businessmen to be kind of unofficial law enforcement people and gave them revolvers. So that's where we were on that.
I don't know who on Bridge Street today would have the, pistols.
Probably you. Of course, yours would say bang and a little flag would be out. Okay,
Rick,
John?
got two more things.
Okay.
Tell the group a little bit about your tours,
Okay.
because I also wanna mention that, through Rick's generosity, if you sign up to become a member of this association, Historical Society, you get a, ticket for, a free tour.
Yep. Okay, in the warm months, for the past 10 years, I've been doing walking tours of Frenchtown, two different cemetery tours and 3 different in-town tours, and they're a lot of fun. It's stories, everything I learned that I think is worth repeating. Okay? And doing the tours is a great thing for an old man because we do like to tell the same story again and again, and the family can only absorb it so many times before there's a reaction you don't like. So,
Last question, tell us about your books.
oh yes, thank you guys. I spent 5 years writing the history of Frenchtown, and I named it Frenchtown, and it cost $30. You can get it over there. And then just recently, I put out a book called More Frenchtown, which you can also get over there. And it's just kind of like the tours, just interesting things that I found out. The first book is pretty much a history of the town. If you read the whole thing, you pretty much know how the town developed and what was there. The second book is just more stuff that I found out that I thought was interesting. So, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay?